Hello, everyone. This is next episode of Enter the Matrix in our road to WTC. Today, we'll be talking about yet another team. We are taking Team Australia to dissect what they did, why they chose such rosters, what are the ideas within their lists, and with a very good reception of the previous episode where we touched on Team USA, we might even try to grab another team. I mean, not grab another team, but talk about yet another team over this weekend. But how are you doing, Nathan?
I am fantastic, and it's nice to be looking at the reigning defending champions to see how they're going to get on this year.
Yeah, and thanks the Northern Irish captain Cahill for actually sending us video of his team watching together our dissection of the lists from Team USA, because I think they are in the same pod. So it was quite heartwarming to actually see some people listen to us in such manner. So without further ado, I think we can just get into it. Let me share the screen. This time, our plan is for it to be less scuffed. So we've written some summaries of the armies, and
much easier.
And we start with something that's very, I think, the most normal list that Ozzy brought. Out of all, this is straightforward GSC. I don't think there's really that much to talk about. It is 80 seismic neos, 45, how do you call them? Acolyte hybrids with demo charges, 2 saboteurs, 3 primuses, 2 nexuses, Klamav was probably for the mirror, and 2 mortal ridges to give that buff even when hidden. Anything to add?
Yeah, it's the GSC version with or without the
Aberrants.
aberrants. That's one. Thank you. So yeah, he's got more demo hybrids, a few more guys on the table, but like we've discussed in the past, gives you more offensive shooting and more play around units. Maybe it's a little bit better for cards in some ways, but it doesn't give you some of the board control that you might want for primary that the aberrants give you, and some of the just toughness and board control that they give you is just not in this list. But again, it's GSC. It's still fantastic. Got way more demo charges than most people. So yeah, is what it is.
I don't think there's much to talk. Everything we said about Team USA and GSC transfers here, although they had aberrants. But both versions work. So let's go into the very first list that's very unorthodox, but I think for those who are like keeping track of what Eric Laturas was playing and posting on his Patreon and like social media what he's trying out with knits, it is not much of a surprise. Australia again taking Gaunt Carpet. And this list consists of Death Leaper, Neuro Tyrant, 20 10 Gargoyles, 20 Hormagaunts, 3 times 20 Termagaunts, 11 Neurogaunts, 2 Lictors, 2 Exocrines, 2 times 3 Zones, 3 Raveners, 3 Venom Tropes, 1 Biovore. So this is the list that what you were mentioning in previous episode quite relies on how you can actually screen your lone operatives with the flood of bodies in a way that, because simply you cannot move within 12 of your lone op and the bodies just flood the marker. You cannot take away the primary, and still needs are really good at doing missions. Although this list having only 1 Biovore is probably not going to be so reliant on playing like Engage, because that requires whole unity to be within a quarter, and this army will string out a lot. But this army will be very good at playing missions like Teleport Homers or even Tacticals if they wish so, but they will struggle to kill at times, so I'm not really that convinced about Tacticals, depending on the mission. But other than that, I cannot remember what was the name of the fixed mission of doing an action on the No Man's Land marker.
Beacons? No, beacons is corners.
Yeah, I cannot remember. You can take that one as a as a fixed one. You can do one in the middle of the board, and you can take one on the markers in no man's land. So I can see this army sometimes playing just those two fixed missions, trying to get those 20, at least 30 points from fixed, and sometimes going for tactical, depending on the mission they play. And this is an army that just floods the board, although there are some things that I find interesting, and I'm interested about your take on it, because I thought this army benefits a lot from having a tyrant when I was looking at it. So not having a tyrant here seems like a choice. Surely tyrant is very pricey. It is 140 points if you take the 5+ feel no pain buff on it, which you, for example, USA took. But the tyrant gives you those two stratagems, which are very powerful, because you can give 5+ feel no pain to 2 units, and most importantly, you can resurrect from 4 units even, because the resurrection, if you are within synapse, allows you to choose 2 endless swarm units to resurrect the 3+3 models. So suddenly, if someone starts chipping your units, they cannot really do it, because you will just resurrect all of them for that 1 CP. So what are your takes on it? Because this is surely a take on NIDS.
Yes, this was the other version of NIDS. If you could go down the super heavy monster list, a hybrid version, or the more hordier version like this. Normally I do like the tyrant. Like you say, it gives you the access to double straps, and also the 6-inch aura for advanced assault on everything. I know most of the gaunts and guards all have assault weapons, but it's still useful maybe in the more hybrid versions. But yes, the tyrant being able to bring back more guys, double feel no pain, because the tyrants is, I would argue, the best one in the game, because it's every player turn, and it's not his own unit. It can be something within 12. The tyrant is a choice, but then again, you can also look at it the other way of a tyrant is what, 40 gaunts?
40 bodies, yeah.
Yeah, it's 40
or
gaunts.
50 even, depending which ones you take.
Exactly. So it then becomes a case of, well, he's not going to spawn that many, and with the feel no pain, he might not save that many. So then it becomes, well, is the assault worth it? Well, most of the guys have assault weapon, so maybe it's not worth it. Couple of nice little tricks in there.
I think this one is down to how the army actually deploys on the board, because the choice whether you have more chaff or a tyrant, I think in this list the choice wouldn't be actually chaff or tyrant. It would be rather some of the smaller units like Raveners or Exocrines, or like singular Lictor for a tyrant. You would still keep the horde. So I don't think we can nearly quantify it as a way of more horde units or tyrant. Oh, something fell. You need to look at it as you are taking other like tech choices within your list instead of tyrant.
Yeah, so I can see why he's dropped the tyrant. It's a difficult army to deploy because gargoyles take up a lot of space. Because the wings, you can't actually put them base to base that easily, so you end up deep striking quite a lot of them. So yeah, like you say, sometimes the tyrant is nice because it actually takes away some of that board issue. But looking at the actual offensive capabilities of the list, it's an offensive scorer. It probably scores cards, set objectives better than, like you say, anyone else in the game. It can blanket the table if you literally just can't deal with that many models. Some armies have very little, like say IK don't have a whole lot of shots. Granted, they still have primary taking capabilities with the number of model OC that they are, but this list still can snatch objectives off pretty much everything, and you end up kind of trading.
You usually need only 4 of your guns or gargoyles on a marker to take away a marker. If you are playing against like IK, who has like OC 10, 8 or whatever, you need 5 or 6, which usually can be easily done on the board. Because you can even charge them, they cannot kill you in melee.
Nope. And also, to be honest, if you go first with this list, you just push 20 gaunts. They aren't CK, so they can't walk through you guys. So you just push 20 gargoyles in front of them, and they just you're sucking your deployment.
Because with gargoyles, you can advance, shoot, and then move another 6. So sometimes you can just block opponent in the deployment zone. I think this list kind of reminds me of how Liam Hackett play Necrons last year?
Yes, yeah, go first and just cover the board.
Yeah.
Potentially. Yeah. This also smashes GSC if it goes first. You just cover the board. Or you can set GSC players can set up their armies, but those units not popping up just don't do anywhere near enough damage, especially when you've got like Venom Thropes. You start hitting on 6s with some of the guns.
Yeah.
It just feels very meh. They don't get the exploding. They don't get the extra AP as well. Is it? It just becomes like the shooting actually feels a bit docile, but that's better than getting 0 because he's covered the table. Yeah, I'd imagine this heavily relies on having 3 lone operatives. Exocrines just help with a bit of shooting, zones help with a bit of shooting, and synapse coverage. Raveners are great for just deep striking around. Venom Throats.
I have one take about Death Leaper over a Lictor. I'm not a big fan of actually choosing Death Leaper over a Lictor because if opponent is playing tactical, it makes Assassinate a little bit easier.
True.
But that's my take, that Neurotyrant will be hidden away, and if you are trying to use Lone Up on Death Leaper, sometimes you just give opponent those points from cards.
True.
And that's a small choice.
I like his extra invuln. I would actually think Lictors are better if they could actually deep strike. The fact that they don't have deep strike is so stupid because they have a free stratagem to rapid ingress, but cool, I reckon rapid ingress 6 inches onto the table. Great. What an awful assassin that is. Like, just give them deep strike. They used to have it. It makes no sense that they don't have it. I thought it would get changed in the recent overlooks, but yeah, it's what it is.
Lore-wise, it makes sense.
Yeah, lore-wise, it makes sense. The only problem with this list is if you can not take the primary off people, you don't really have the damage to take people off primary. So, like, Custodes can hunker on a couple of objectives, still be, 21 OC a unit. You cover most of the front of an objective. It's difficult to be taken. You can't charge those Custodes. They're still going to probably beat you on primary, but it's still kind of drawy because you both get cards. Pretty decently. But yeah, overall a good list.
Yeah.
And a great player you can get.
Yeah, I think this is an army that if opponent has ways of killing it, like Death Watch, it will just die within 2 turns.
Seconds. Yeah, Desos pick up this army in 3 turns.
Yeah, but not every army has means to do it. So I think this is a great choice. Although unless you are very versatile with it, I can really see problems with time because there are so many activations. So, but this applies to every horde choice you ever take.
And when we did some testing, depending on the Eldar list, this wasn't awful at blunting Eldar. But again, it depends on the Eldar list. Some of the more, say, Spectres they take, the easier this army just starts falling over. Yeah.
Or Spiders.
Yeah, Spectres, Spiders. So it ended up being, if they actually took, and to be honest, even when you roll 6s like Manny, Wraith Knights still pick up most of the unit.
I mean, Wraith Knight easily can kill 20
with
1 shot. Like, that's not even...
Yeah, it's just done. Because you're getting, on average, 12
D3
shots
plus 4 shots.
Yeah, exactly.
From each gun.
Yeah.
So I think this army will be used as a way of preying on just flooding the board. So like gun lines, if they do not have like good blast weapons, can suffer. Like armies that rely on more deep strike play, like you mentioned, GSC will suffer. So there's a play, but as soon as you are able to just push with 1 unit and just ignore the damage output, this army can just die quickly. Obviously, if you are good at playing with hordes, you layer your units, you make sure opponent needs to kill 1 layer, then another layer. They cannot easily tie you up because of how the new pile-ins, etc. work, that you can actually work around it, but this is very time consuming. And I think it will be very time consuming for both parties. So whoever is playing that army or against that army can expect all the games go to full 4 hours.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we got to with it being, it's good, but it didn't seem like it had a much better matrix than a hybrid nid list, and then it wasn't worth the yellow card for getting time penalties.
Yeah.
Or potential of getting yellow cards, because it only takes one.
And there's also a problem that maybe it's not even mentioned that much, but you need to factor in the fact that there's 7 very demanding games usually at the WTC, and playing an army that fatigues you will play a factor when it comes to the last day. Because if you are playing an army that requires both a lot of mental and physical work, it will, at the end of the event, hinder you to some extent.
Yeah, if you start misplaying this army, it'll start going downhill quite quickly.
Like our game, we were playing 2 hordes against each other and just not having fun at the last round of the event. So this is not great. But like, I think this army is good. But for the next one, this is another hot take. I think this, but I don't think it's necessarily very out there like a wild idea. I saw it going around the internet quite a little bit, because when it comes to the list, for those listening, we're talking about Inari from Australia. They have 1 Farsi Skyrunner, Incarn, Ivrain, which is Warlord, so that's why it's Inari. 3 Fire Prisms, 5 Hawks, 10 Guardians, 5 Spectres, 5 Rangers, 3 Ravagers, and aren't we missing? And
1
there's
Wraith Knight.
And 1 Wraith Knight. Yeah, I knew I didn't write down something because suddenly it didn't add up to the points. So yeah, there should be 1 Wraith Knight also there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we all expected that.
So basically, how I look at it, you pay for Ravagers are really cheap as a platform for Dark Lances, but you pay a tax of 105 points.
Yes.
For them.
Yeah.
So you essentially pay, 100 points. You essentially pay the 30 points more per Ravager, where I think when you think about Ravagers as 120 points, it suddenly changes maybe your look over it. When you think about other units you can field in Aeldari, because those 3 Ravagers and Ivrain is equivalent to Spirit Seer with Wraithguard. In this list, you do not really have Night Spinner. So also you do not have Indirect Fire, which also changes a little bit how you play it, especially combined with Incarn, which actually benefits from Spinner killing some chaff, and then you can open up the game like crazy.
Yeah.
So there are some choices, but I think with Aeldari, it's still a very good list.
100%. It's like we said, the problem with taking the tax of Ivrain, it then makes the Ravagers for 95 points. You start to question, while being very good, because I guess when they shoot a fresh target, they get real 1s to hit, and they still get the Eldar 1 reroll to hit, 1 reroll to wound.
Yeah.
So then it becomes actually, even though they're not Dark Eldar and don't get the pain token full rerolls, they're actually still basically getting full rerolls.
They kind of have full rerolls.
Yeah. So the extra 9 Lances is great. The only problem I would see with this list is it's actually quite difficult to hide 3 Ravagers and 3 Fire Prisms. And the way that Fly works now, so he probably has to reserve some of it. The way that Fly works now, because I was testing Dark Eldar for quite a lot, the Fly's neutered. So trying to move those Ravagers around wasn't actually that easy.
Getting line, and actually the problem is getting line of sights with those bases, because you need to, if you are on one side of the L and you need to be fully with your base on the other side of the L, Ravagers actually have their bases in the middle of their whole frame, which makes you need to move a lot to actually get those angles. So this list, I feel like, can be a little bit more dependent on the terrain, because also they do not have any low knob choices for objective holding, which usually with Eldar you would take Illich, you can take Dev Jesters, you can take Solitaires, You can even go for Fugan, which is basically a lone up with his resurrection, right? So there are like other choices, and I think this army will still perform well. I'm not sure what they were trying to target with Ravagers specifically. Maybe it's about tailoring for Mirror, maybe to some extent. What's your take?
Maybe I can see that, but you got to think that the 3 Ravagers are the same as in a mirror. 3 Ravagers is basically the same as the Wraithguard block, which will probably be more useful more of the time. I'm not a huge fan of the Guardian unit. I get it. You can hide the Farseer in there, and it's okay, and it gets you the extra die.
It's a Skyrunner Farseer, so you cannot hide him there.
No, so
it's Ivrain in there, and she gives the Final Pain and Resurrection. And actually, Ivrain anti-infantry has quite decent output with anti-infantry 2-up and dev wounds profile. So she's not like useless. And like she gives some tricks with her resurrecting guardians, as we mentioned in previous episode with like Grey Knight. You can have unit behind the wall, 1 guardian popping out. You kill a little bit of them, then she resurrects them back on the marker. There are some tricks.
Okay, yeah, I can maybe see that then. Yeah, just maybe it's the other versions where I've seen it where they have the guardians and it just feels like a bit of a tax. But other than that, yeah, it's Eldar Chinari. He'll still score really well, but it doesn't. I would say that maybe it's not the strongest Eldar list there, but they've obviously got some tech choices in there. Ravagers are obviously there for a purpose. Maybe they thought every team was going to take double knights, like they did, or it was going to be a lot more of a big model.
But they wager into double knights. You want those 10 Wraithguard more.
Yeah. And actually 3 Ravagers and a Ivrain of a Wraith Knight, which again is still probably better.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Interesting choice. Good list though. Still good player.
So moving on. You want to take this one?
Yeah. So we've got CSM. For those who are listening, you've got Abby as usual, Abaddon, Chaos Lord, 10 Cultists, 10 Terminators with all the usual stuff, 5 Chosen. 3 Forge Fiends, 1 Nurgle, 2 Undivided with the plasma cannons, or whatever they're called now. 1 unit of 4 Nurgle of Blitz, 3 units of 3 Flamers, Blue Scribes, and then Changeling. So a couple of interesting choices here. Chosen units, quite cool. I guess I'm assuming the Chaos Lord joins them. Can't join anything else. Abby goes to Terminators. Chosen, did I give them advance and charge? Was it?
I can check it out.
Maybe that's the mark. Pretty decent combat unit. Nice little scoring unit as well. Wouldn't be my first choice necessarily. Only 4 Obliterators is an interesting choice.
Especially they are Nurgle.
Yeah. I thought they'd have gone for maybe the more damage output with the Undivided version, if you can only have 1 unit. 3 Forge Fiends, again, still fantastic damage output. Still 2 lone ops, but no Cypher, who I know is more expensive, but it gives you a lone op and a Vect, which is useful. Otherwise, it's basically got most of the same components as most CSM lists, but it maybe doesn't do the out-and-out damage that some of the others do, which have 8 or even 10 of Blitz. But it still pretty much does the same role. It's rinses people from shooting and has kind of just enough scoring and board control with the Terminators to then try and push the differential.
Yeah, I think that in this case, it's more like Chosen with the Chaos Lord have a free strat as a regular Lord gives. So they are a choice with full rerolls, Chaos Undivided, so you can have another unit that's just in a single turn, you can double full reroll 2 units. Although there are some choices that I'm surprised about, like Terminator Squad is Nurgle by themselves.
Yeah.
So maybe sometimes there's like a plan to play them without Abaddon, maybe.
Is the Chaos Lord in Chosen Nurgle? Or are they called?
No. They are Undivided as well.
Okay, so he's not double Nurgle strategy.
No. He's not.
No, okay. I thought they might be doing that with the Chosen. they run to a side objective. It goes, well, I'll just use the Nurgle Strat for free. And then the Terminator block's also on Nurgle Strat. So it's like it's almost like a pseudo lone operative again.
Yeah, but you have two lone
way more
ops.
expensive.
I don't think you need that much Nurgle Strat if you already have Blue Scribes
No.
and Changeling. Especially sometimes Changeling will just roll a 6 and you cannot do anything.
Oh, not sometimes, all the time. That's what mine does. Yeah, it's always a fun one. But yeah, only 4 Blitz is an interesting choice. Chosen, I don't know, maybe you didn't need them because Chosen in the Chaos Lord is most of the points towards another Blit unit. But yeah, it's good still.
Yeah, I think like actually the one Forge, if you swap one Forge Fiend and the Chosen Squad with Lord, it's basically the list of USA if you change Link into Cypher as well. I'm always interested of not having Cypher. I think it is a point discussion probably that they couldn't fit it over Changeling or Blue Scribe because I would always take it over Changeling just because the getting one strand more expensive is, as we spoke in the previous episode, like it can be paramount to how much changes into certain matchups. So yeah, I think everything that we said about USA kind of translates here. This is another army that with less obliterators, I feel like it is more dependent on the boards.
Yes. Yeah.
Because obliterators at least can try to use their no-loss shooting to negate some of the problems you will have. And with how immobile the army is, like I can see why you chosen. Oh, that's a sentence. Because they will, with advance in charge, they can sometimes try and reach farther markers that you wouldn't be able to with your units.
Sure.
So, but I think it's like there's 3 versions of CSM when I look at it at the event. You either take 4, 8, or 12.
Yeah, yeah. We were finding that the more damage output, the better, because you can almost make up for slightly less scoring by just nuking your opponent.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we got to with ours, but I can see this one's a little bit more well-rounded. It's less of a dud in pairings if it doesn't get to play something that it can just wipe off the table. So yeah, it's still good.
I think when you look for those lists, there are some choices that surely mean that they probably have like a more elaborate plan how to do pairings.
Sure. Yeah.
And when you go with more straightforward lists, it means they need less babysitting in pairings, usually.
Yeah.
So this might be relying on some masterminds, although I have a strong opinion there's no masterminding in pairings. It is only information game.
Sure.
So another list, and this is not as surprising, but it's slightly surprising. So we have Thousand Sons, Ahriman on disc, Exalted Sorcerer on disc, Infernal Master, 1 Sorcerer, 1 Terminator Sorcerer with the Vortex, 10-10 5 Flamer Rubrics, 2x10 Zangor, 3 Vortex Beasts, 10 Terminators, but no Magnus. And I think this is the only Thousand Sun list without Magnus at the event, if I'm
think so,
correct.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
which is an interesting choice.
Yeah. What's your take on it?
It's got most of the hallmarks of what makes Thousand Suns good. He's got the Exalted on disc, which I think they're my favorite unit in the army. I'm building up a couple at the moment because they're fantastic. Double slow, like we use 2 in our list, but even just having 1, just that automatic slowdown, and then you just move them back around with a piece of terrain. It's fantastic. He's got 1 sorcerer, so one of his units, probably the 5-man, is you can't shoot them over 18. Super useful. Zangor's an interesting choice. Not really played around with them, so I can't really comment on them too much, but I guess they're just cheaper scoring. I maybe would have taken Enlightened because they're faster, but I guess they might help for screening, being 10-man units on
more and
30
also
bases.
more OBSEC. I mean,
Yeah,
OBSEC,
more OBSEC.
objective secure.
Yeah. 3 Beasts is an interesting choice. Difficult to hide. They are huge models.
Oh,
If
yeah.
anyone's, yeah. But then again, increasing the ranges of everything, and they also just have a great pretty great shooting attack as well, especially when you get that hit with the big lance one. 10 Terminators, again, it's an interesting one. The FAQ didn't help them too much. You can't make the whole unit psychic to then shoot indirect, but they still have a good amount of output and a good use of strats on them.
Yeah, but without Magnus, the damage is like +1 to hit and +1 to wound is a lot as a buff.
Yeah, also 10-man units, no rhinos, makes it a little bit more difficult to. This is not the easiest army to hide. It's got what?
Yeah, and I think this list is like more susceptible to like indirect armies, like say guard.
Yeah,
like guard when it sees this and guard goes first, it can be just done.
Yeah, just pick up the important Terminators or just start picking on the rubrics, and you start taking these kind of armies off. Yeah, again, they must have a reason for it. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say horde, but it's a bit more blocky than other Thousand Suns armies that I've seen.
You basically have what? 3 10-man blocks of Marines, one being Termies, and 3 Vortex Beasts, which have like similar resiliency as 10-man Marine squad.
For sure, yeah. So this might allow it to be a little bit more put forward. But just to see.
Although if I were going with like Defender army, I would go with more Exalted Disc Sorcerers, but that may be only me. That tech changes a lot.
I agree with you. No, like we were running 3 at one point, but we decided on 2 in the end. But yeah, I think that especially if you are going to be more defensive with the list, just being able to slow people down is so massive in some matchups.
But it still can be an attacker in certain armies, like
100%.
But I think everything we kind of said about the no, we haven't spoke about the Thousand Suns in US because they didn't have. But I think we mentioned them. And I think this army, when it comes to pairings, it is way less resilient than it was previous edition. Like you suddenly, sometimes you just die if you overextend, and it is very susceptible to be tagged down because your only way of actually getting out of melee is Doombolt. Whilst previously you had whole psychic phase to actually kill those units that tagged you, and then you could proceed with your regular shooting. And now you are actually some chaff can actually tag you and keep you in combat, so you cannot use those flamers and stuff. Obviously, there's Overwatch and other things, but
for sure.
Overall, the army, I think it will work well. Like the flamers combined with no armor save and making them psychic and full rerolls, just nuke stuff. If the target doesn't have invul or feel no pain, so it's not like I wouldn't be super surprised if I see sometimes 10 flamers just kill nearly 10 Rave Guard.
It can happen, but then again, this feels a bit more like a list that has to extend more of itself to try and kill something because you don't have magnets to buff stuff as much.
And you don't have rhinos, which also makes those flamer units way more useful because you get that additional movement of a rhino going behind the wall. You disembark 3 inches, then you can use the Cabal to move additional 6, and suddenly you grab angles that you wouldn't normally get.
Exactly.
And this list doesn't have that tag that allows it to grab those angles. Like you need to do it on board. Obviously, you can double use it, so you can get plus 12 movement on rubrics, but suddenly you are spending way more on the actual resources you have by cabals. So I'm not really sold on Rhino-less rubric lists. I think Rhinos really extend them, and I think this is a case of when we were talking about like the orcs that USA brought. The tracks and units inside with bringing layers of units on the marker forces opponent either to commit a unit to contest that marker or actually commit a lot of units to kill units on that marker. So I think there's always a benefit of having those layered approach with how you do it with transports. So this is, I think, the list of Thousand Suns from the event that I like the least from those I've seen. I won't lie.
Yeah, I can't necessarily disagree, but they obviously have a purpose for it.
Yeah. You wanna take this one?
Sure. So we have Necron, which is by
Spicy.
yes, Liam Hackett, which hasn't gone down the usual route of Lichguard. So he's got Cesraz, I can never pronounce his name correctly, Command Barge, Chronomancer with Veil, Nightbringer, Transcendent Satan with the Fort Builder Pain, Royal Warden, Overlord with Stealth, 2 blocks of 20 warriors. One's got all Reapers, one's got 19 Reapers, one with Flayer, 1 Ghost Arc, 1 Reanimator, and then 2 times 2 Thralls. So we put this on the table thinking, oh, it maybe doesn't seem that strong. But it's basically one of those lists where if you can't deal with a whole warrior unit at once, it's going to basically come back. So this list is very, very good at drawing with people. It can null people quite quickly. Damage output is limited. There was a couple of interesting choices, which I'm not an expert Necron player by any stretch of the imagination. One thing that I wasn't quite sure what he was doing was he has a Ghost Arc, which is transport. For this, you have to have a model that starts in the transport. The only one that realistically can go in it, I'm guessing, is Cesraz.
Yeah.
Saris. Which then he didn't get to use some of his abilities, I think, because he's obviously not on the table, which was an interesting choice. But then again, Ghost Arc is just useful anyway. It's basically 2 blocks of 20 warriors with loads of characters and 2 Satans.
And they have Armor of Contempt, additional AP from Sarah, so there's
no Feel No Pain though on a block. But
one of them has Invul, only the one with Orican. I don't think we've written Orican here, but there's Orican the Diviner as well here.
There's one of the units can advance and shoot. The other unit, or depending on how you put the characters in, one of the units can shoot and then move 6, kind of like gargoyles. So it's quite nice, and they have the Veil, I think, when we use them. So you can Duke Strike them over, shoot a load, use the strats for extra shooting potential, and then move back again.
I think, seeing at the list, I think how it will be played is Chronomancer with Veil, with Royal Warden, with the squad with 1 player. And because they will Veil, they shoot something, they move, they can take away a marker, and Flayer is there for that range difference. So you are not only limited by the short range weapons, but you can have 1 guy shooting the further range weapons, and at the same time, because characters also have shooting, but that way you can still protect your characters from precision. Because they can be hidden behind the wall. So that 1 Flayer guy is just for a purpose of actually being able to hide your character, because normally you could use the Chronomancer buff by just shooting with the Royal Warden, right? And the other squad I would expect to have Overlord with Stealth and the Orican the Diviner. So that one is the tankier unit with 4 up invul, -1 to hit. And you shouldn't scoff at the melee of the army as well, because sometimes if they pop additional IP and strength 5 of warriors, they can dish out a little bit of damage in melee, even if they try to charge you, tag you, and just go with all that resurrection shenanigans over the board. So how I look at the army is, if you are thinking about playing it, you need to either have 2 ways how you can approach this matchup. You either can kill Ktans really quickly, which I think some armies can just do it. Or if you have an army that can kill the warrior squad in 1 activation, because you have something that's very powerful in shooting, and some armies just have those things like the 6 Crisis Man squad, right? Something like those units can actually try to do it. And this way, if this army just loses 1 of those big blobs, suddenly its whole game plan will just collapse, because it loses a lot of the board presence. And suddenly, if they cannot counter such unit that is able to kill everything, it can do it the same with the other squad.
Hmm.
So it is an army that I see if you can kill everything that's around those units and then get to killing them, you can play it. And as they do not have as much like damage output, I can see them having issues like say into Custodes, because Custodes can just rush them.
Yes. Yeah.
And you cannot take away a market that's just surrounded by custodian models, because you cannot move on it.
It also didn't feel like it had the best scoring. Necrons do struggle a little bit with cards, not the fastest army in the game. Your Satans are probably going to have to try and keep up with some of that work, unless you want to use whole warrior blocks to do secondaries.
No, you probably use the Transcendent Clan to teleport around and do the missions.
Yes, but then he's not. I know he wasn't phenomenal at damage output, but at least that's all he's kind of doing. Nightbringer was an interesting choice over, say, Void Dragon, but I see the issue with Void Dragon. He's really difficult to hide in certain matchups.
Yeah. And he has big base. I think actually Nightbringer's 40 mil base is a huge thing.
Yeah. But then as a tech choice into certain matchups, Void Dragon is very nice. Nightbringer, his gun's fantastic, but it's like AP2, which is a bit here.
And I think it was 12 inches.
Yeah, it's like 12 or 18. But it's D6 plus 3 damage, which is one of the highest there is. But then it's like AP2. So like Custodes in cover still have a 3-up save. It's like, okay. That's a shame.
And they might as well superior roll that one.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it's 18.
18, yeah. Otherwise,
it has like decent melee, like 14 attacks at damage 2 is
good.
Still good.
Yeah, it's good in combat. D6 damage in combat though, so it's a little bit dicey.
With dev wounds.
Attack. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
how do you imagine they are gonna use it in pairings? You mentioned that it is like a drawish list. I think this is meant for it. I don't think you can like go into say Eldar and count on drawing, because this is the same case. I don't think there is a difference for Wraith Knight if it's killing 20 Guns or 20 Necron Warriors.
Not a huge difference, no. It just roll a lot of 6s. Who cares? Because this doesn't really have mortal defense, because he hasn't got Feel of Pains. I obviously don't know enough about Necrons, but I'm not sure this is preying on too many builds. It probably can prey on any Hordia builds.
I can see it like trying to play into GSC, although the squad without invul, when it gets hit by the bomb squad, just disappears.
Yeah, because you get
because you get actually I refrain what I said. +4 on blast.
Mm-hmm.
No, you cannot.
Yeah.
Never mind what I said.
Is it? That means you're getting what? 28
D6
plus 46?
Yeah.
D6 plus 7 each?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not great.
No, it's not fantastic. You should. But then Overwatch and 20 Warriors, you probably lose them. But then the next squad just comes in.
Yeah.
It does things. Like you say, as long as if you knock a whole block over.
And to be fair, against GSC, if you do not kill 7 of them, you haven't killed any of the bombs.
Yeah, you haven't done enough. Yeah, and he doesn't have like 4 rolls to hit.
And then 4 guys. Okay, cool. We'll still throw everything and it.
Take this with you.
And just
So
I don't think it can play into Custodes. I don't think it can play into Custodes, GSC, or Eldar.
Nope. Thousand Suns maybe, but bit drawy.
Yeah, I mean the squad without invul, if it's getting hit by Thousand Suns, it suffers a lot.
Massa Blitz is. They've got a lot of shots. They can maybe knock down warriors, but not necessarily in one go.
I don't think they can one-shot them.
No, so maybe it's okay into CSM. It's probably quite good into knight armies, because they definitely can't knock anything down.
No, they can't deal with it. No.
And it's a lot of OC, so it's not the easiest thing to take primary off this Necron list. But then again, most teams haven't taken knights in any shape or form. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure its place, but
Like, you guys
defending
didn't take
champion.
Necrons for a reason as well, right?
Yeah, we just kind of felt that it was a little bit. Do we want to take armies that offer potential draws in places, but don't actually give us answers to certain things?
Yeah.
How useful is that sometimes? And then if it was kind of a case of we played a couple of games, maybe because Manny's list was more extreme, it was kind of a case of, well, if it was still getting smushed by even the Lichguard version didn't love the GSC and didn't love the Eldar, it's like, oh, how great a put forward it is sometimes. But it's later, maybe a later put forward, it is better. I can see this being a good late put forward, or it's nice to have to hold in your hand to be like, okay, well, it's either going to be what the army's left in the hole at the end and just can kind of play most things from that point, or it's useful later on to be as a put forward. I can maybe see that because it does have some movement, but Veil's what, 1 use only. So once that blob's moved, it's not the fastest thing to redeploy
And
again.
especially nowadays, for those listening, I think there was like a design commentary that mentions that you can only resurrect the models that started that phase on the board. So there's a reason why like GSC cannot resurrect after going back in reinforcements, because they weren't on the board in the movement phase at the start of the movement phase, etc. So with this army, suddenly there are like funny interactions depending how you place the models. If there's only like one Necron warrior surviving, you cannot probably resurrect some of them back, because you cannot fit more models and stuff. So there are like niche interactions that might occur, but I do not really expect them to happen. So I'm curious how this army will perform. Like, Liam Hackett is known for choosing different approaches that work, so I'm not scoffing at it.
100% not. Underestimating a list like that would just be a big mistake for any team to
do. Yeah. And now for the most straightforward army. So this is Chaos Knights, 2 Stalkers, 6 Brigands, 5 Carnivores. Every single one of them has Havoc Launcher. End of the list.
Awesome. Got even hurt by the FAQ somehow and made their army worse. But it's one of my favorites.
What you mean by that?
So it's a weird. The WTC ruled that for the indirect missile then counts as the closest target for brigands. So if there's 5 dudes behind a ruin and you've got your brigand here, usually it used to be a case of, well, I get the +1 AP on the indirect because that's the closest thing that can see, but the rest of the guns get the +1 AP against that other thing that I've lined up to shoot. Whereas now they've said, oh, well, that's your closest because you took indirect. So then it becomes it's actually sometimes quite difficult to get the extra AP, which is what you want on the Gatlings. I think brigands are fantastic. The extra AP and the
weapons
hitting on 2s is fantastic, and good weapons. Yeah, good weapons to have. A little bit indirect, some mass shots, and some very good melter, because melter being short range, being extra damage is awesome now. Carnivores are actually
but let's not like sugar coated. Like, meltas are not great this edition overall. Their strength is very underwhelming.
I didn't find it too bad when you have 8. So this has got 6 brigands and 2 stalkers worth. The melters do get through if you're playing other big things, but they become so dicey. The melters,
they are very unreliable.
Yeah. So even in some pairings, it was a case of, oh, if he fails a load of saves, I'll rinse his army, but if he doesn't, actually, it's not great. They have my favorite strat in the game, the move through terrain and move through models.
Yeah.
Which makes Carnivores fantastic because they're probably point for point one of the best combat units around. Because they didn't get a huge combat tax. The list is very good at scoring. It's not as badly affected by terrain as, say, IK is, because actually small guys move around. Pretty good. But yeah, they basically have a useless army ability because
I don't think you will ever use it. Like, if it happens, you're like, cool.
Yeah, it vaguely happens once a game. I think the amount I've even played, I tested them against orcs a few times, and it was a case of, okay, well, he just CP passes the one unit that I actually want to have the bonuses against. So then it ends up being cool. I get +1 to wound versus 3 storm boys in a corner. Like, great. I was so God, I couldn't wait for that. It's like, okay, yeah, the ability is just useless. They needed more. It needed to be something like they're -1 to hit and +1 to wound from the whole game, not from turn 3 onwards. And it needs to be once a thing's shot, take a battle test then and there, so you can actually capitalize on it a lot more. But
yeah, now it's very situational.
Yeah, it's even less than situational. It's almost a party when it does actually do something important.
Yeah.
But
and I can imagine actually Solly playing it. He will actually throw a party when it actually works.
Yeah, you'll hear the clink of a beer can opening probably.
Yeah.
But yeah. Otherwise, I love it, but yeah, not my first choice.
I love it as a player who played a little bit of Chaos Knights previous edition.
Yeah.
But I don't love it in the team comp.
No. I can see what they're doing with it. It's not awful at getting points out of some people. If people can't deal with that many baby knights, it's okay. It's pretty decent against, say, guard, if they didn't take too much in the way of anti-tank. Because I'd imagine, spoiler alert for whatever the next army is, but there'll be rounds where they just go, that army can't deal with knights, here's double knights, here's IK and CK.
Yeah.
Because it's effectively a full mech army that's good at primary scoring. So it's one of those, it still scores.
But it suffers from secondaries a lot.
Yeah, it does, yeah. Because you have to lose too much damage to do. Carnivores can run around and do secondaries, but yeah, it was.
Yeah, but you need to do it on like a marker, and you expose yourself, and then you suddenly paid 150 points for one action on somewhere on the board, which is not great. So I can imagine this army being very, very unreliable in scoring because it can get clunky with the secondaries.
That is true.
And it's still like fights on primary. I think this is the same case as it was in 9th. Like this army was meant for playing primary, and secondary was just an add-on.
Yes, yeah.
So
that's fair to say. It is very good at primary. Like we start chucking 3 knights on every objective, and it's like, oh, now he's got 24 models on it. Effectively, it was very difficult to take off. But then there's some armies where just custodes go custover, and then just take it back from it. Yeah. But you can
they just right-click your deployment zone.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Otherwise, I love it, and I'm glad a top team did take it. But and also this version didn't have the lone ops from demons because obviously they get used elsewhere. They're always a nice. You can actually get 13 and the changeling in, which is actually pretty useful, especially in this list. But I'd imagine they wanted to make their CSM stronger.
Yeah. I can see this. I can see this being, as you said, like a double pairing with the Imperial Knights, or sometimes also a throwaway. Unless something is like really good into killing them, they can actually survive a little bit.
Yeah.
Because grabbing angles, etc., if they are hiding behind walls, is not so straightforward this edition.
No. Sure.
So, and they do not require as much babysitting in the pairings. So
not as much, but when we found,
I mean, terrain wise.
Yes, terrain wise.
Yeah.
Yeah, having 2. I know they're different, but 2 knight armies usually one suffers in the pairings because of it.
Yeah, but Chaos Knights, because of their strat, can actually work around it.
Yeah, they can play from terrain pretty well, actually.
Yeah. And now for something we already mentioned, we have the Imperial Knights with agents. There's the Crusader with Gatling Cannon, Battle Cannon, and Mysterious Garden, so the teleport thingy. Warden with sticky objectives, 6 Warglaves, Eversor, and 2 times Exaction Squad.
Yeah.
So very straightforward. I think this is like a cookie cutter version of Imperial Knights you take. There's not much wiggle room. I like Eversor instead of Khalidus if you are playing actually Imperial Knights. because he can advance, do actions, etc. You get reach for tactical cards that you might not sometimes get with Calidus.
Sure.
So there might be some usage of you throwing him away, like going into opponent's deployment zone and doing deploy teleport homers or behind enemy lines because you choose for him to be able to advance and charge. Or then after advancing he can shoot, so he can like advance, get into the deployment, do missions, etc.
Yeah,
But
some
I
interesting.
don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Some interesting choice with the bigger. I think Canis is amazing. Like, I think Canis is the main reason for taking IK, because the gun is good with the exploding, the combat's good with the exploding. He's
The
most all-round
melee, if you go for mortal
monstrous.
wound,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you get the free strat, so it does mean you can have 2 big knights on rotating. Granted, you can play around that a little bit because you just start shooting Canis first, and then if he uses it there, then he can't use the strat elsewhere. So yeah, there's play around that, of course.
But you can rapid ingress him for free, which is also nice.
Yeah, useful things like that. The Crusader is nice. The only problem I have with the deep striking one is because you pick him up, he doesn't get a command phase to actually put the abilities on himself and the smaller knight. So you lose a little bit there. But yeah, being able to just deep strike him is useful, really useful. Yeah, Deep Strike was it. Walk on. I think it's Deep Strike.
I think it's deep strike. I'll check it so we don't blunder like last time when we mentioned that Deathwatch has no shooting, no
that was
indirect
my
shooting,
mistake,
when we mentioned 10 Desolators, which for me actually was just something that is always in Deathwatch lists. That's just innate thing that you start army with 1,660 points.
Because of the new structure now, it's not in like HQ Elites, troops, fast attack, heavy support. It was just like veteran squad, 10 Desos. I thought it was another veteran squad, 3 infiltrator squads, and then 2 Proteus kill teams. Yeah. So the only problem I found with the Crusader,
deep strike.
It's deep strike. It's proper deep strike. The only problem I found with the Crusader sometimes was you have to kind of stand still to get the bonus.
And there's one mistake also. Warden can choose to Warglaives, not the sticky objective.
Oh, is it that one? Is it? Yeah, okay. That's the main one then.
Yeah, which makes sense. You want 2 with -1 damage.
Yes, because you've got the less little guys for scoring. A couple of them being -1 damage really helps him. It's nice for you can run them against Custos a little bit and still be like, I can maybe still hold on to this objective because he's not going to rinse 2. And if you surround the objective, like plonk 2 on it fully.
Unless you have Trajan.
Yeah. Unless you have Trajan, which not everybody took. But again, the problem I had with the Crusader, to get even better, it has to stand still. Most of the time, you didn't always have a great shooting option. So some of its ability was not always fantastic. But yeah, other than that, it's good. Again, Crusader is very expensive. I preferred Canis or the Forge World one, the Poor Man's Canis, whatever that one's called. The 440-point one was very good in pairing and testing we found.
I don't remember.
I think it begins with an A. Whichever one.
The Magara?
No, it's basically got the same gun as Canis.
I don't know the Forge World Knights.
But yes, that one was useful if you wanted to really because it's almost 9 inches tall. You could hide it behind the big rune at the WTC. But when it stepped out, again, it had Canis's weapon effectively to then be able to be quite good at maximizing towering. Like we've discussed on previous episodes, IK, it's got a couple of really, really bad matchups. So that
I think it needs to play as a defender. Like, you cannot afford to play it as an attacker, I think. Because there's not enough armies you can attack on their boards. And and you have to play on your own board to make some of the bad matchups manageable or acceptable.
Yes.
And then I would expect IK to actually underperform this event because they will be the armies that in those cases will probably be like, okay, well, let's put, as we have some other armies, for example, can draw IK. So either IK will allow opposing like throwaway lists, like those 7th, 8th choices to be put into them if they can play them, or either Eldar will just step in and say, okay, that's my 20.
Yes, and that was the problem. Like, you can't put them forward first because even though most teams will want to keep GSC and Eldar to bully pairing later on, there sometimes it's just difficult to not just be like, here's GSC and Eldar, cool, they both smash you. Like, good luck. So then it becomes a case of, then you have to kind of babysit them a little bit later in pairings, and like you say, they need certain tables to. If you play like Custodes on a heavy table, it's probably in Custode favor, especially if you haven't taken Canis. To be honest, Custodes would beat that on an even vaguely heavy table. So yeah, it just comes down to they're just going to not. If they get everything in the correct order that they want, lighter table, preying on something that's not very good at killing tanks, great. It will actually smash some people. It's just very difficult to manufacture that scenario.
Yeah, and I think teams that will identify that during pairings will make sure that those tables are not available for knights early, and try to actually navigate the pairings in a way to exclude those tables from the pairing process quite early.
That's true, yeah.
So, any takeaways from the whole team overall?
Again, nice to see from the Aussies to the US, where they took a different set of lists. They actually took some interesting options. Again, Australia didn't take Custodes
and Marines,
and didn't take Custodes or Marines. Yeah, so no Death Watch, no Custodes. They have gone down a little bit more of a let's either go big things or let's go slightly hordier, which kind of feels like they may be prepped for more of a big armored meta, slightly more maybe. But yeah, some interesting. Double Knights is an interesting choice. It'll either bite them on the ass or it will be very effective.
Or we're all wrong.
Yeah, or we're all. They're either way ahead of the meta or the list of trash. So it's definitely something in the middle. They are the defending champs. Australia always has a very different meta every year that they've been one of the more successful teams. Obviously, a long time ago, they were towards the bottom end of the table. Now they're towards the top end. It's one of those, they've always had slightly different things. But I think in maybe a pseudo index edition that we have now, it's a little less tricksy and it's a little less predictable. It's a little bit more predictable that these lists aren't, say, as crazy as they were last year, where some people were like, what on earth does that do? And then they were getting smashed because they just didn't know what it did. Whereas now it's a little bit more predictable. But still, good lists, great players. They still have, obviously, they are still arguably one of the favourites to win, but definitely some interesting army choices.
Yeah. When I was asked on Fireside Podcast, actually, which of the like seed one teams I expect to underperform the most, my shot was on Australia. I still don't know whether Brody is actually playing or is it Eric after that one Facebook post. But I don't think they have Hayden as well, so I'm not sure how they're like swapping some of the previous champions actually will work for them on like a personal level. So I'm not yet sure about their skill. It's not like I'm calling them bad. It's just I know some of their better players left, and I'm not sure whether they have people of equal caliber there, but there might still be over prepared compared to what we've done. And because they've shown this previously, so I wouldn't scoff at it. But looking at the armies, I think they are not the most out there armies because I will try to at least get us to talk about Germany. But you have like Germany, Spain that also went completely different route, or like France with some different army choices. So I don't think they are necessarily bad if we see it through our lenses, where Poland and England usually end up with quite similar take on the meta.
Yeah, usually relatively similar meta.
Yeah, I'll be really when I will not be actually in the studio and rather doing the floor work and scouting the tables, those will be the games I will also look into to actually
100%.
see how those armies work and what was the idea. Because I think throughout the event, when we sit down there and actually get to analyze a little bit, getting some like early results in, seeing some of the games, at least like the first turn, if you were to go and look at them, we'll be able to dissect how those armies are actually meant to be played, because even watching deployment alone will be sufficient for us to probably further analyze what's the plan for the game.
100%, yeah, and that's the thing. On paper, yeah, I would maybe agree. I don't understand. I'm going to leave it at. I'm not going to say they're bad, because they're definitely not bad in any stretch of the imagination. But it is. I'd be interested to see how they're using these armies more than like they would be my pick to be one of the not worst, but like underperforming top teams. But they could all prove us wrong.
I might also have a grudge in me, so
Sure,
there might be something personal on my end.
I get that, yeah, and yeah, but good luck defending it. I think it's only been done once.
Yeah, and I think it was Germany 2015 and 2016.
Yeah, so it's a very difficult feat to accomplish. So yeah,
you need to get lucky twice, basically.
Yes, yeah, when there's so many top teams now. But I would say, to their credit, obviously we don't have the inside scoop as much, but we know from what we hear they are one of the best prepared teams for sure. Like they have these boot camps where they go and play loads of games, which is massive.
But I don't think this year we see any team saying they are not prepared. Everyone is saying they are very prepared, and they start working their asses off as soon as they got their hands first on the edition. So
yes,
when I think about them underperforming, I think this is the same case like last year. It was Poland and Aussies like working our asses off, doing a lot of preparation. I think more teams picked up on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think this necessarily will be such a game changer, because I think more teams have done their prep work. So yeah. Anything else to add?
Nope. I think we've said our piece.
Cool. So we'll try to record more, grab Germany probably tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you'll have any other team, we might be able to like go with maybe even two teams if we sit down and decide to lose 2 hours of our time to actually give you some insights. So if you have anything else, because I saw Germany being mentioned, please tell us so, and we'll make our best to actually facilitate our time to try and do that. So thanks for listening, and see you in the next one.